Hello, everybody. Welcome to Riot Lasso Live. I am Chris Schmidt, and we are going to be answering Cinema 4D questions all day. This is episode 18, which is getting up pretty high. Episode 18 of Season 5. How is everyone doing? I hope everyone is doing well. Start getting those questions together. Otherwise, we're going to have to answer the question of how do you open a banana? So let's not do that. Also, I'm not locked in, but I feel like I'm going to be trying to work this rubber duck into some parts of the stream. I'm not sure when or where, but you can see, look at this lovely duck that I had modeled and textured up based off of an actual duck that I have that I won from a claw machine in Las Vegas. So something I'm going to try and integrate. So people think of things that we can integrate the duck into. But Mr. Fresh has a question. I believe Mr. Fresh has been good about getting us ideas. So why don't we jump in and start taking a look at that right away. All right, so we've got something from Stephen Kang, which is cool because I don't think we've ever seen any work from them specifically. And it looks like it's a still, so it mostly goes to like this cotton candy vibe here, because obviously putting a sphere at the top isn't going to be doing a sphere at the top is not much of a challenge for us, so I think we're talking about this. So they used Houdini, but we've got this going on. So we've got, as far as I'm concerned, if we are trying to attempt to do this cotton candy or hair-esque thing, then we've got two options, because obviously the main thing here is that we've got this pattern where it very much feels like it's mostly spinning around, not entirely, but mostly spinning around. So I think that's what we're aiming for here. Having said that, why don't we get two different approaches. One is going to be with hair, and the other one's going to be with Rocket Lasso's Ricochet. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D 2023. I'm going to turn a fan on. It's getting warm quickly as soon as I turn all the lights on in here. Better. Okay, so can't integrate the duck into this one too well, but opening up a brand new file. When it comes to the hair, I don't think, well, maybe forces could do it. Actually, I just have a way to put the duck into it. So let's try it with the duck first. I'm going to copy the duck in the new file, paste it. Now, I probably will scale this up just because the physics of cinema this is like real world scale. So you see if I make a figure that's nice and tiny. But like hair and stuff is going to tend to look better on larger objects. There's the forces and everything. We're used to working at cube scale. So keep in mind that is something we are doing. So I'll scale the duck up to 600%. All right. So what my initial thought had been was if we were to do it manually, you would do something like add hair. And now we've got hair on there. Drop the length down to what, 25? Yeah, maybe 25 is okay. 5 segments. Even leaving it here, we would be able to, if we wanted to, just start combing it. So if we go to our hair tools, hair simulation, hair tools, tear that off. And now we can do things like grab the brush. And there's also a curl, but I don't think curl's going to do what we want. If I click and drag, you see they're all individually curling. I'm not, I guess we get some, direction and strength, but I don't think this is like a global thing. So if we were to go to the top view and twirl, you see each one's just kind of doing its own thing. So I'd probably go for a brush, a nice big brush, and just start brushing and starting to spin around. Potentially you could make an inner model and an outer model and have it collide. I haven't set any colliders up, so right now this is just doing what it wants. But I don't think it would take that long of, like, even just doing this, I feel like very quickly you could manually comb and get the stuff in a pretty good orientation. And even here I feel like almost all of these have gone inside the model, just the quickest, most casual thing. So I'm going to ignore all these ones that came out the bottom. I could erase those out, but let's just say the duck shouldn't render, and we can now see that we've got all these on the outside. So even just having done that, if we were to render, I guess Redshift will render hairs. They should render them out of the gate. Yeah, very large, but let's go into our hair material. hair material. Thank you. And go to thickness and say that this should be probably 0.1 by, or 0.1. Yeah, a little bit better. Yeah, so that starts looking thin and wispy. So we could push that technique further. Obviously, we could do things like change the color, you know, if we want to aim for the cotton candy thing. Just go for a solid. I'm going to stop the render. The updates are, it's constantly trying to update every click I do, so let's prevent that. Cotton candy is probably significantly more pale. It's probably paler than even I'm imagining. So yeah, we could do this, scatter more hairs, push things around the surface, probably make them even significantly thinner than they currently are. 0.025. Copy, paste. Start making them nice and thin and wispy. And we can make longer hairs and make them a little bit duller. And you can see that pretty quick we were able to get something that's actually, like in a lot of ways, this got smoother flow than the reference we saw. And let's take a look at that so you can see that, yes, indeed, in the reference, you know, that there's a, you know, a general direction, but there's a lot of kind of scatter and randomness on top of it. So ours is even more uniform. Obviously, it's a lot easier to add randomness on to any uniformity. So inside of basic, we can activate things like some curls or some wave, or kink is usually a good one to go to. So even just activating that, yeah, we're going to suddenly see this all frizz out quite a bit. So, you know, scale, kink, let's drop that down to like 5. And we can add a second, actually that's probably what I would do, is put this one with just like a little bit, and then make a second one, probably telling it to generate like 1/10 the number of hairs. And then we'd have to give it a separate hair material. And this one we could go like super high, or, you know, we could do waviness and whatnot, but, you know, just having some random hairs are going to be more extreme versions of it to kind of fill it in. Let's throw in just some lighting to get some depth on here. Good old dome lights. HDRs. Just grab this interior room. Let that run. That should give us a little bit of shadow and depth in here. It's going to take longer to render, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's doing a surprisingly good job, surprisingly quickly. We could add variation. We could definitely change the highlights to be a little bit flatter, because right now it's like a little shiny. Depends if we're actually aiming for cotton candy or if we're aiming for the reference. But yeah, keep in mind that hair did a pretty good job pretty quickly. And, you know, and that, you know, look how quick. I mean, I did that so quick just from the top view, so we could do so much more like trimming and angling things out and whatnot. Now, what I'd originally what I was going to propose was instead, and I suppose I guess we'll give it a save. So save that in episode 18, scene files. 1A. Hair swirl, cotton candy. Instead of manually doing all of that, I thought that a good way to go would be, let's go in guides, go into editing and regrow. Regrow. So now you see it's all gone back to default, so it's kind of flying out in all directions. We could, if we wanted the volume filled, I'm trying to think how I would actually want to do this. If I'm so inclined, how would I get, we could invert some normals and get them aimed on the inside. Oh, okay, so what am I trying to do? Well, what I want to do is kind of scatter hairs in the interior of the duck as well. So let's turn this off. But a thought would be, what is a good way of getting essentially a lattice structure? Like in 3D printing, you always put like, you know, the interior will have something like a lattice inside. I'm just trying to think of what a good way of getting a lattice structure would be. This is not something we've ever specifically tried to do, but just out of curiosity, let's make a plane, feed that into a cloner, grid is fine. 1 by 1 by 10. And space it out. I don't know how big this is. 25? You know, even that's still way too much. That's per step. Move this up. Okay, so you can see I've got just a bunch of different layers. Probably spread them out a little bit more. Okay. If I put that into a connect, it'll treat it as just pure geometry. So if we Boolean this, let me save another version. If we Boolean this, will it leave the proper mesh behind? I don't know. Bool, A subtract B, but we just need A intersects B. Oh, I copied the hair. Whoops. There we go. Okay, not quite what I was expecting. It seemed like some of the layers kind of worked, and some of them did not. I just had another idea. I do want to. I got 3 questions for myself right now. We can do what I want to do using a Voronoi fracture. Let's hold off on that because I want to see if we can figure out this lattice structure. Although I can't think of too many other directions to go. This is supposed to be A subtract B. This is just a thing that things like the bool will do. Yeah, actually, I was kind of expected that. The high quality one is trying to be smart and do like super smart additional algorithms. But if we just say, nope, like just do the dumbest method possible, you see it actually does a better job in this particular instance. So you see it's now created like this very messy outline. And it looks like there might be a couple problems because the duct should be a perfect volume. And there are a couple of problems. But if we melt the n-gons, or what's the best way of doing that? Is there a melt? Yeah, I'm going to use a melt deformer because that melt isn't the type of melt I'm talking about. Put this after the fact. Yeah, so if we put a melt, this is a capsule. You can see we can parametrically turn it into n-gons. And you see that actually did a pretty good job doing a lattice structure for us. And you know, we could do additional things there. And the thought would be we could do a lattice here by doing some vertical ones and maybe one at 45 degree, and it would kind of give us some interior dimension in which to apply things. Which, you know, I'm still not against the idea. If we were being super duper parametric, we'd have to use some Rocket Lasso plugins here, because what I'm inclined to do here, oh, yeah, that's actually pretty funny. Like here, I was trying to make a lattice structure really meticulously, and not trust it. But of course, we could just use Slicer, and that's like instant lattice structure, obviously. So Rocket Lasso tool Slicer, I'll remote into the duck, and we'll say that I want to return flat geometry, and we could scale this to duck. I'll just shrink it down, make as many slices as we want. And yeah, instant duck, and because of the very nature of it, I can just make a copy and then rotate, and I can see as I do that now we've kind of got the lattice duck I was talking about, like with just a couple of clicks. So obviously there's a lot of power there. We do this all from 3 orientations, and essentially that gives me the lattice I was talking about. So we've now filled in the interior of the duck. So I just showed you a manual way of doing it, and then here is a way using Slicer to do it. Creating a connect. I'll drop all 3 in. We don't need to worry about welding. So anyway, now we've got this entire surface, and then I could now just do it from scratch. Why not? Select the connect, simulate, add hair, and now hair is being added all over because it's based on the polygon. Actually, it's based on polygon vertex. I'm going to say you're based on the polygon area. So now it should be essentially cloning randomly onto every single polygon. Drop our length. I'm going to go shorter than we had before. I'll say just like 10, 20. So now we've got these going, but the direction is based on the normal of the polygon. So you see everything is like pushing off to the right or going up. But we could say, actually, you are random. We say regrow, and now you see they go off in every single direction. But now we've got all this interior structure, which actually by itself could look kind of cool. I'm going to say that the connect should not render. And let's apply that pink. The pink cotton candy, and actually I'm even going to make it frizzy. I just want to see how this works with a nice big volume. So yeah, make them kink and add in some I like this interface better. What would, oh, frizz is really good as well. So frizz and kink. Now this is not showing us the end result, but if we go into our hair and say viewport preview, I want to see the final hair lines, you'll see it's actually going to start showing us the final hairs, which is pretty cool. It's only showing us 25% of them, but you see that is showing us a better output of what the actual final will be. So if we, how do I want to do it? I mean, we could put a curl in there that should pinch everything down, especially if we turn these off. By adding some curl, you see everything is going to start bending inward. I can say 180, and now that we're gonna get these tiny little curls kind of going in every direction. And then once we add some frizz and kink on top of that, now we can start getting, you know, more the shape of the duck with all this fuzziness. I just want to see how that ends up looking. So we're only seeing 25% of them. Let's just pop open Redshift and see what that looks like. Very fluffy. It's very soft. It has to resolve quite a bit before we start seeing detail, but I don't know, it's pretty neat. I like the idea of like filling this random volume with all these different hairs, and just getting a big old, like all these tufts, filling it in. So it's kind of fuzzy. I mean, it very much looks like a ball of lint right now, like really clean lint. Maybe out of like the laundry machine, out of your dryer. So yeah, I love all the fuzz. We have options. I'm really digging the way that looks. And then actually these highlights are not so bad. They do feel fuzzy and less cotton candy. But I do dig it. Just because it looks neat, I'm going to make there be 10. Let's tell the viewport. I'm going to go back to it, just showing. We'll lower that down to 5. And say that there should be 10 times as many hairs, just to like really fill this out. So that's going to take a chunk of time to do a refresh. Because, yeah, there's way more to calculate. But it looks pretty cool. Very fluffy. And we haven't even started to do the directional stuff yet. There we go. That's looking way denser. Definitely have to let resolved a little bit. Yeah, look at the voids and everything we're getting kind of just naturally showing up. Like you get these natural, like completely random, but kind of a darker area here where there's probably not quite so many hairs randomly going. So yeah, this is, now that's like a ducky hairball right there. That's really cool. I've never seen anybody, I've never seen like a still or a render that specifically is doing this type of thing. So it's kind of cool. Definitely someplace to explore. Like you see how easy that was to put together. A couple of slicers and then instantly we're able to take on the shape of the object. There's probably some things we could do to also stop things from escaping, but I think on average, because they're going in every direction, on average, it's going to fill in the interior, and you just end up with these lovely, completely random wisps that can escape off the edges. So I'm super digging the way that that looks. I'm going to take a screenshot of that and post it in the Slack channel. See if more people want to come join. We're making fuzz ducks. So yeah, super digging the way that looks. So keep in mind, we're having good luck here. We could change the property here. Right now, I guess the original reference wasn't explicitly cotton candy, so maybe we shouldn't try and chase it. Like right now, this looks fine as like fuzzy pink lint. So let's just pause that. And now let's talk about some directional stuff. So under the viewport, let's go back to just showing our hair lines. And so obviously I showed you that we could very easily paint in some directions here. But let's try and simulate it. If right now, I mean, there's not that many hair guides, so running simulation on this wouldn't be hard. In fact, simulation's turned on by default. So if I hit play, I feel fairly confident we just hit play, and yeah, you see everything falls. So that would definitely give them a vibe of like a direction. If I reactivate the hair lines, which honestly I'm kind of inclined to do. So I'm going to drop the hair count way back down again, and then show the hair lines. But now we can go back up to 25. So you can see that there should in general be a more downward vibe to them, but we added so much curl and random that I don't know that that would come through. But And let's duplicate that. Call this one pink curly. But let's go back to this original one, and for now we'll turn off all of those directions. So yeah, now you can see it'll be going down, but we want to start playing with direction. So first step, we are going to want to run simulation on it. So we'll leave that on. But inside of the simulation, let's say forces, gravity equals nothing. So gravity's doing nothing. Hairs also don't interact with each other, and hair-on-hair forces don't do too much. But now we can start playing around with regular old forces. We got two options. We can be using our rotation force, and we can be using a more complex field force. But let's start out with the rotation. We don't get to use that one very often, so this is actually an excuse to. I think it spins around Z, but I'm not sure. So we'll spin the upward, leave it all default, and hit play and see what we get. So let these spin around. Okay, it is definitely spinning around. Yeah, it's spun. Let's view from the top. Not bad. I think we can weaken the force a little bit. Let's see what this does from the top view. And keep in mind, we're actually looking at final hairs here. 25% of the final hair. So yeah, that's actually doing an excellent job of curling around. Now, something you'll notice is we're getting this kink right at the start of each of the hairs, because this hair naturally wants to go out, but suddenly it's like, no, but it's trying to bend in. We can actually, I think, do things about that. If we go into the hair and we go into our, it might be dynamics properties, we've got fixed roots. And it might be the fixed roots. So yeah, let's just turn off fixed roots and then hit play and see. Okay, it was... There's fixed roots, there's hold roots, but I think we definitely want one of those. But maybe we want to fix roots but not hold the roots. So we'll try that instead. Oh, I think that was what I wanted. So I got rid of hold roots. And now you can see that each one isn't trying to maintain their original direction, and they feel free to spin into the new orientation. So it just makes this entire thing like way smoother. And now we've got this swirl without any intervention from us like whatsoever. Now keep in mind, we got things like where if the hairs are long and they're on the beak, they're going to kind of escape where the beak was. But the original shape we were looking at was just perfectly radial, where obviously this duck is not perfectly radial. But let's that looks good. So let's apply the curly version, and yeah, see how this looks. Now that's going to get rid of actually I guess we'll keep the original one on there, and we'll start introducing some effects. We can add kink in, and yeah, you see, I think that's still maintaining some direction. We add frizz, that's really going to mess up the tips, but I feel like at a glance I'm definitely getting some rotational vibe in there. Let's modify these to be weaker. Yeah, so we definitely get the spin, but we get some fuzziness. So I feel like that's a good in between. Let's go back to the hair. I will put 4 times as many, which the viewport handled just fine. So let's render this. Output, let's make it square. Okay, let's see what we get now. Yeah, Dean, we were actually going to go and try and use Ricochet. Surprisingly, we ended up using Slicer instead. Okay, so some things I'm noticing. Now that it's not random, we're actually taking on the direction, I can feel the layering. Do you see how we were seeing that lattice effect inside? So in a spot where the wind was blowing away, here you see the wind was blowing towards us. It was spinning around, so we don't see the lattice because it's kind of hidden inside. But in this spot where it pushed away from us, we do see the lattice. So we'd have to hide that additionally. I can definitely think of a way or two of doing that. But we are getting that nice direction, and we probably just want to pull a little bit further back on the frizz. Like honestly, a little bit goes a long way. Let's just say frizz is the one that makes it kind of deviate further and further from the tip, where I think kink more maintains their original orientations. Now, it's only thanks to the shadow that we're able to see all that internal structure there, so unfortunately we can't see that in the viewport. Like it just doesn't have that shadow. Yeah, already you see the getting rid of the frizz, that we are definitely feeling that directional nature. So I love the little tuft we get on the top. If we were trying to match, if we were trying to be a little more literal and match the original reference, I think we could probably just thicken this thing up. I'll just double it for now. Yeah, we'll thicken it up. We wouldn't need quite so many, so I'll cut that in half. So each individual hair is thicker but calls more attention to itself. And then options we have for hiding that. The number of grids we generate, or sorry, the number of guides we generate has nothing to do with the amount of geometry we feed in. We told this hair to generate exactly 3,800 guides, and that's what it's doing. So we could go back into the original slicer. We can go into this original mesh and just say, hey, there's going to be more. So if we double it, we'd have double the resolution. We'd still see it, but there'd be double the resolution. I don't know that this will be perfect, but what I'm thinking is, what's the best way? These are n-gons, and Slicer Slicer is designed to only return n-gons. So let's turn off the hair for a moment, and I'll save another version because that fuzzy duck looked really good. We could increase our resolution, but what I'm thinking right now is we grab all of our slicers and I say, you are splines. But now that they are splines, we can feed them into a loft, but I think a loft might get confused. So let's see what happens. If I feed this to a loft, or I'm sorry, I put that into a lathe, put this into a loft, you'll see that the loft gets confused. Like a loft doesn't know how to handle this type of spline where each one is traveling through. Now we can go in the slicer and say, hey, return everything as exploding every layer. But now the loft doesn't know what to do with that either. So we pull that out because loft can't handle hierarchies, but the extrude can. If we turn on hierarchy, now you can see that the extrude was able to do that. If we do a offset of 0, it tends to make flat sheets. Yeah. So there can occasionally be an error, but now every single one of these is technically a different object. But there's an alternative way of getting geometry out of Slicer. But now that we're in an extrude, we can get all the power that you get from caps. So I can say, actually, you're going to return, actually we can go a Delaunay. And if we keep our density cranked up, yeah, if we keep the density cranked up, then we get random triangles. We could turn on a grid as well, but this gives us random triangles. And if we grab the slicer and enable the spline, what do I want to do? We could say subdivided maybe? And now we can start decreasing, yeah, the point, that we're increasing the point size, or we are increasing the point count around the perimeter of every spline, which is just straight up increasing our polygon count that kind of cascades through. So now you can see I've increased that. We could decrease it further. You can see that there's more polygons. Like I said, that's not really costing us anything. It's going to be quicker to delete those 2 slicers and duplicate this 2 more times. We'll take this one and spin it vertical. And we'll take this one and spin it horizontal. And we're pretty much back to where we were. Now, something also to keep in mind is right now I kind of arbitrarily picked these to be at like nice 90-degree angles, but you know, we could spin one at a slightly different angle, and that actually might make it harder to see the grid. So just keep that in mind. But now all those are getting combined. So then I'm going to take I don't use this very often, a random effector, and we're going to turn into a random.deformer. The reason we don't use a random as a deformer is it very chaotically grabs every single point and moves it in a completely random direction. But that's what we want right now. So I'm going to say, okay, grab every point and move it in a completely random direction. So we'll drop this to 555. It's still quite a bit. But anyway, you can see what I'm doing now is I've now taken our lovely grid, deformed it so much that these could be traveling in any direction. We can, you know, double or increase the resolution however we want. And now I've created a very controlled but chaotic surface that's, you know, filling in the interior. So we reactivate our connect, which is now something for our hair to view. Hide that. We'll say the hair should regrow, and it's going to be, well, it's going to take a little bit, but I'll just hit play. We'll let that swirl around a bit. Ooh, it's chugging. It's doing it, but it's chugging. That's a lot of hairs. Looking good, looking good. Okay, I'm feeling some pretty good uniformity there. Okay, so now let's see if, I don't know if it'll work, but let's see if that hides the grid, which was the goal of doing that slightly different bit of internal geometry. So yeah, here you can see the grid very clearly. Now let's render again, see if we solve the problem. Also, we've got the fewer but thicker hairs. Yeah. Don't see the grid. Now we are seeing that kind of perfect orientation from there. And there is a level in which these traveling very inward, that's something that radial does, or this type of rotational spin. And it wouldn't really be much better if we do a field force. Although I can think of a few things that might improve it. No. Yes, no. But it just depends on the orientation that you're viewing different parts. So if we view this from the top, you can see just, you know, where the swirl is happening. And that's, the duck head is a little bit more far forward. So I think that's just a pattern we end up getting. But yeah, you see the idea. It's working surprisingly well. I'm very pleased. More frizz equals more good, I think. But I dig it. We'll keep that saved as another version here. I want to try and make this look a little bit fluffier, just for the fun of it. So a lot of that goes to have specular. We don't want a sharp specular, so I'm going to pull back on the primary and secondary specular. Come on. It's doing a giant hiccup on every update. I should probably stop redshift as I do several changes I want to. Significant hiccup there. Hopefully I didn't freeze. If I disappear, then I upset redshift. Still not updating. Right, I'm gonna prepare the task manager just in case I killed it. Starting to think I killed it, which we didn't. All we changed was a specular, but. Yeah, that should have definitely refreshed by now. Boop. And we'll just reopen up Cinema. Start getting the next question together. I think I'm going to do a quick version of this using Ricochet as well, just to see what kind of results we get from that. Okay, so I just saved, so we shouldn't have really lost anything. I think we lose the simulation, so start that over again. Oh yeah, turn this on. Oh, okay, we did lose the deformation, so I'll just bring that back. Random. Deformer, point, effect. What do we put that on? 3, 3, 3. Oh, and we gotta subdivide the points. Spline. Oh, well, okay, I lost a little bit more than I thought I did. Geometry, none. Spline. Segments, explode based on layer, enable. Subdivide intermediate points to 2. Delete, feed that into a extrude that sees the hierarchy with 0 offset, caps turned to Delaunay. It's not, yeah, cranked up so that it is not subdividing that. And duplicate, rotate. Cool, activate. That might have been slightly less, 222. Okay, that gets us back again. Collapse, hide, hair, grow, nope, editing, regrow. It always throws me off that grow isn't under growth. Okay, anyway, that catches us back up there. I just wanted to leave that scene file available for people. So, keep in mind that we could do a very good job of controlling the direction of these using things like field forces, that we could put some outward force from the normals of the polygon or some inward force and have them directionally aim in. And we could, do rotational stuff with a fall off. Like, there's a lot of different control. I mean, I think you could create you could do some, I was going to say pyrocluster. You could do some of the flame stuff or the pyro. Yeah. Not pyrocluster, but pyro. You could use pyro and create like directional forces from that. Like, it gets crazy the way you can layer things in. But anyway, we actually are going to super simplify and attempt a ricochet version, which might not work great on the duck. It would work really well like the example had, where it's just kind of swirling around. Also, I was thinking about, if we look at the swirl, this probably also could have been achieved by deforming the hair after the fact as well. But anyway, if I create a ricochet, so another plugin from Lasso, we got a couple options. I could just put this inside the duck and say we're going to link to the duck, hide the duck. And now you see it's just bouncing around the side. We can crank it up, but let's hide the duck. And I'm going to say I want to follow the surface a whole bunch, and I can see it's taking on some direction from the surface. I can move it towards the front, which should start, in theory, spinning it around forward and backward. Get rid of some of this randomness. And, well, you'll see that we start ending up where it's like somewhere in the head. We'll get something like these really nice swirls where it's kind of traveling around and around and around. But inside of it, the line is hard to travel or follow the line. But you can see as we do this initial line, that it flies forward, it collides with this polygon, starts traveling along it, and you very quickly, even with no randomness, the polygons are just kind of dictating this type of rotation, like kind of randomly going around. We got some options. The first thing I want to try, not something we use too often, but we have this direction link. So I'll create a direction link, and now this is saying that it always wants the ricochet to essentially have gravity, to always travel downward every single step. But I can say planar, so I'm going to say negate Y, and if that orientation is correct, which I don't think it is, we need to spin this like that. This is now, it should be attempting to influence the direction to try and be more radial. Let's start increasing this. Yeah, it definitely is, but the natural shape of the duck is still, you can see that we get more of this horizontal vibe, and especially on the head we get that spinning around, but you can still get these random ones that are traveling like very, very significantly. So a lot of randomness there. Pushing it even a little bit further, let's grab the duck, and actually I'll turn that way down so it's having no influence, and let's just trap it on the outside of it. So ricochet modify, let's give it a shell of 1 with a surface offset of 1, and try and trap ricochet in between one layer. Yeah, there we go. So now you see it's trapped on in between these two, so it's kind of wrapping a shell around. And yep, we can do whatever length we want there, spinning that around. We can do some randomness from surface, so you can see it would be twisting around. But yeah, this is giving us a little less direction, like a little less direction than I was hoping it would. Our planar negate Y. Yeah, it definitely gives us, you can see that it's giving us this horizontal, like here you see it's purely random, and if I start cranking this up, we definitely start getting this horizontal vibe, but it's still not, there's still a lot of randomness here, and it's not quite giving me all that directional orientation that I really want. So yeah, keep that in mind. So maybe it just turns into, that slicer really was the way, or the hair was, really a good way to go there. Having said that, we could pull in one last slicer, and you can see that if you did want to just get these perfect lines around the outside, slicer, object, duck. Crank up the slices, definitely need a lot less range. We could just put like a ton of slices here, like really fill up the duck with a ton of slices. And even you see if I hide here that we're seeing the entire duck, and we could take that those materials, and I think just by applying that material, Redshift should see it. It's not. It's returning as a spline. Does Redshift see hairs? I guess Redshift probably wouldn't. Redshift probably doesn't see the hair material. Redshift probably sees just the Redshift tag. So let's add a Redshift object tag and just say, okay, give me a curve. Hair. Yeah, there we go. 0.02. That's very thin. The duck, you can see the polygons of the duck. I guess I wanted to distort them. That's pretty funny. I wanted to distort these via the lovely controls we get in hair, but it doesn't seem like Redshift is seeing that. Yeah, if I apply the tag, it only sees hair as hair, unfortunately. That doesn't stop us from doing things like feeding in, and let's put that random in. Let's put random deformer based on points, and we're going to go real light on this one. So you can see that's kind of randomizing that. Now you can see we're getting this outline, not exactly, but it's kind of like a wicker, kind of this wicker pattern a little bit, seeing the individual bits fly around. So again, we could go to slicer and make there be way more. Let's do 2,000. So there's 2,000 of those. Now you see it really fills up, and we can get this outline going, kind of doing this weaving type effect, which is interesting with the randomizing. It'd probably be a good idea to run it through smoothing to actually, yeah, we can do that trivially. I mean, there's a lot of lines here, but let's feed that dangerously directly into a smooth, and let's even subdivide once. We are now exceeding the point cap, but I'm confident we can override that. And let's only do 2 iterations of smoothing. Now, smooth is happening after the random. So it's seeing the deformer. So it's smoothing it after it got randomized. So if we move our render tag up 1, you can see that that is now rendering. I imagine we'd want some sort of Redshift material on there to actually give it a color. Yeah. So yeah, you can see that I've randomized those, but they end up getting smooth afterwards. So, a completely different idea, like a different style to apply, but Slicer doing a fine job creating a whole bunch of these different layers. I want to go into the random. Now that we're smoothing it out, I kind of want to push this pretty far. I'm going to say 3 by 3 by 3, and then smooth is going to apply. So you still see we get these kind of smoothed out lines traveling around it, but with all of this randomness added on top of it. So it's kind of a fun thing to layer up. Make these a little bit thicker. We're starting to get towards mummy duck. But yeah, using Slicer and then randomly distorting it and then smoothing it after the fact gives another like pretty cool effect that, if we go back to the original reference, if we decrease the, make these not as thick and maybe make a few more of them, like this would also be doing a pretty good job of that. So yeah, Slicer to the rescue for this question. Do we have other questions? It looks like we do. I'll save this one. I forgot to put the word slicer. A-B-C-D-E. Forgot to put slicer in the title of the previous one. But well, let's see if there's any specific follow-ups here. Mr. McBubbles is asking, is a standard environment in C4D? This is a HDR that comes in Maxon 1. So if you have a Maxon 1 subscription, maybe even just a regular C4D. Actually, it might be a regular C4D subscription. I think I grabbed this one. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I think, yeah, it doesn't have the 1 symbol. So if you just have a Maxon Cinema 4, correction. If you have a Cinema 4D subscription, you should have this HDR. So the name isn't super clear there. It is apartment, empty room. Cool. Just check if there was follow-ups. Yeah, not Ricochet. Instead, it was Slicer. What if gravity was turned off, but a rotation? Oh yeah, that's before I did the rotation. I appreciate Joe TV was on the same page. Gio also has a question. Is there a way to use the newer sim system in Cinema, as opposed to the bullet system, to create hard objects? For example, dropping rocks on a trampoline. Yes. It's not. Well, let's just do it. So rocks on a trampoline. A fine example. So trampoline. We'll just use a square or a plane to keep it simple. We'll make that editable. Do this as quick as possible for the basics. If we turn this into cloth, we are allowed to select all of our points, shrink by 1, invert so we get the outline, and then we can say dresser, fix, and now those are stuck there. So that's our trampoline. If I hit play, you'll see it just goes flop. Now we could make those really, we can make this really tight and tense and have a bunch of weight, etc. But we'll do that for now. And now let's say we want some rocks. So should we try and I kind of want to generate a couple of fun random rocks. I don't know how well this will work, but what's a good, and we got so many good tools that can do this type of thing now. So maybe we'll just keep it really simple. I'm thinking I'm going to clone some rocks. We could make several different types, but for the most part, I think we can just be pretty messy with this. So I'm just going to put it in that random. We'll do that same deformation thing and let these deform like a significant amount. So you can end up with like, you know, kind of crazy shapes like that. Now we could leave it super low poly, but what I'm thinking is we throw that into a cloner and we will make, I'll make a linear stack. And let's set the random one more space. The immediate thing that jumps to mind is that'll be quickest is we could do this several ways, but let's do a blend. So I'll set that to blend mode. And if we grab one random and we give it a very, very different random seed, every single one of those is going to get its own unique deformation. So it's kind of like each one of those becomes its own type of boulder. Now we could deform a bunch of different primitives here, like shift this to a buckyball, and now you see we get a like way messier one. We can go to like a dodeca and get something not very, not terribly crazy, but let's leave it simple with an Icasa shape. And again, keeping it simple, I think let's put that into a connect, weld them all down, feed that into a, do I want to put it into a volume? I kind of do. Put that into a volume builder, volume mesher, and voxel size can be pretty big. Yeah, something like that. And then, you all knew this was coming already, feed that into a remesh. I'll drop that down to even 25% of this. So now you can see that we've got some reasonably reshaped, well, one of them did not work very well. What broke that? It's actually the remesh broke that. Let's say adaptive count. Okay, adaptive count, what does that mean? Because it fixed it, but it seems to have changed my count a bunch. Adaptive count seems... Yeah, I don't like what adaptive count was doing. But anyway, let's just try different counts until one doesn't break a rock. So it doesn't like 15, but probably any other number. Yeah, that's fine. Also, let's get rid of the adaptiveness so it's very even overall. So anyway, it's just an easy way of getting some low poly rocks. In fact, I want to increase it a little bit to make it a little more challenging for us. Okay. We got a twisting polygon right there. Doesn't look amazing. Anyway, we could keep on trying to make more and more rocks, and there's a lot of different methods we could do to keep on making them crazier. But anyway, we got some different rocks there. They're all treated essentially right now as one mesh, but that's fine for our purposes. Let's save. Rocks simulation. Okay, so that's our plane. Now let's add another cloth. So default cloth on there. So first thing to do is say, well, I don't want it to be bendy. You definitely want this quad diagonals to be on double. And it's a good idea to turn on balloon. We can even like drop that down to like no expansion time. So that if they're constantly trying to maintain their current pressure. So that's as far as we could go in the past. So let's hit play and see what that looks like. If we run our simulation of that, then it should be, you know, it's doing okay-ish job. Like, because we got rid of all the bend, you can see that they look a little squishy, bonk, 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 bonk. Like they look a little squishy when they hit there, but it's not terrible. And they're because of the pressure, they're maintaining their volume very well. So that's one thing. Now, also, you could go into your simulation and go to your substeps. And if we double our substeps, we should essentially see half of the deformation we just had. So those are going to look more rigid than they did before, as well as the trampoline. You see the trampoline actually feels like it's got a little more bounce to it. That's not a bad idea to do either. So I'm going to leave that with a little bit more tension and bounce there. But now the thing we can do that most is going to make these feel more like rocks is going to be going into soft body as a tab, which I still think is not correctly named because this makes them feel less soft. This maintains their structure more. Anyway, just by turning this on, you're going to see we get these, think of these like tent poles. These tent poles connecting from one side to the other. And it's pretty much like, okay, well, here's a connection. And before, what was happening is like just that polygon, this point to that point on the polygon, was trying to maintain like a certain length and a certain rotation. But especially as it would go from one polygon to another, to another, to another, to another, you know, you kind of get this cascading effect where it's like, well, the system is trying to say don't bend at all, but still going to bend like 1%. But when it bends again, it's like, well, 1 and 1, and then 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. But you can imagine that once one bends a little bit, the next one's going to look like it went even further and even further and even further. So what we're doing now is by creating these poles, it's like these tent poles that are shooting across, finding the opposite, and pretty much making a direct connection from there to there. So now imagine the system right now is like, well, these two have to stay locked within each other, and it can only bend up to 1%. But that means that there's now this relationship that's not going to cascade with 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. Instead, it's going to be a single pole connecting them. That kind of goes all the way across. So let's just leave that at default. The one thing I'm going to do is say softness 0. We don't want those to be squishy. So completely default, but we leave that 0. Let's hit play now. See them fall, and look at that. I mean, even right now, I'm not visually seeing those bend, so it's pretty good. Like that's working quite nicely. We could go in here, and essentially the last thing we can do is just create more of these. I could say create 2 points per pole or 3 points per pole, and we can even add a little bit more random rotation here so they can make additional connections shooting all over the place. And you can just keep on adding more poles. It's going to slow you down, but more connections just means more internal structure. So, so yeah, now deselect that. There's so few polygons on the scene that that's still not going to be slow. So now you can see we drop, and there should just be more structure overall. We get these bouncing around, lots of poles. And it does seem like a little pop of energy suddenly popping in there. I mean, we do have a lot of poles here, all trying to maintain their current length. Now, I don't think that bounciness is going to like visually end up having too much of a result here. Like let's try adding 5 bounciness. I don't even know really what that means, but I guess it kind of looked like they bounced, but I mean, now they're passing through each other a little bit. Honestly, I think we went overboard with the poles. Like we don't need more than we need. So I'm going to go back to that default of 1. You know, even if you wanted to double it, like go up to 2. So that's adding plenty of structure. The bounce, I don't know if the bounce is like a percentage of maintaining power. I would kind of prefer that bounce was a percentage. But if we say 1, maybe that's trying to do power. I mean, to tell you the truth, I'm seeing a little bit of weird movement there. Maybe it's just them colliding. It looks better this time. Hard to say. Bunk, 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 bunk. I do feel like there's some kind of yanking down. And there's no stickiness, but anyway, you see that they're not deforming, so that's the main thing I was aiming for here. And we got like a very, very simplistic rock generator. That's kind of fun. We can make more rocks just by going. There you go. Instant double boulder count. Rocks have got to be dark gray. Yeah, there's definitely. I feel like there's some slightly weird movement. It's hard to quantify. We didn't crank any numbers up really high. I've talked about before. I had to be careful about. Oh, that's funny. I guess the poles need to be updated. Yeah, this is without pressure, but the pressure, like even there, you see that sometimes they just yank each other off. That's a little weird. Let's go back to regular substeps. I mean, it seems a little better, but that could just be randomly better. And one of them spinning out of control. Yeah, here we're not introducing too much energy into the system, but like all this rigidness and whatnot, like maybe it's just propagating energy through. I don't know. We could drain more energy out from the system. I don't like doing too much of that. It's a very heavy-handed thing to do. Yeah, unfortunately, well, for now, that's all I can think to do. You can see that, works reasonably well. Not exactly rigid bodies, but I don't see the deformation. Now, keep in mind, the more complicated your object, if it's a heavily subdivided object, it's going to try and be more squishy. It's just the nature of it. Keep in mind as well, especially old school techniques, where if you have something that's very heavily subdivided, you could do a low poly version, which is easier than ever. We could do a volume and the remesh, do a low poly version, and then deform the high poly version with the low poly version. I do that very often. Like when I worked on the John Wick titles for John Wick 4, there was a very complicated mesh, and it's like, okay, well, I need to run soft body, but I can't run soft body on something that's got like, 50,000 polygons. So instead, I made like the 500 polygon version and just did the mesh deformer. Tobias, thank you. Yes, indeed, everybody should join the Rocket Lasso Slack. I'll put the link in YouTube as well. So, excellent. Yep, building rocks. Maybe we should do something bolder. Nice, Joe. Yeah, that's great. Arbel. Berate me. Well, I'm going to say your name is or it's Arbin. I'm going to say it's Arbin. It might be something fancier. I can say Arbin. But Arbin was a first-time chatter and was asking a new question. We'll check that one out in just a moment. Any follow-ups to this rock thing? I know we didn't go too far, but I'm going to experimentally just turn this into a collider and see what that does. It's probably a bad idea, but let's just see. Bunk, 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 bunk. Yeah, seems fine. I don't know that we're not going to get bounce. I think bouncing is definitely something you don't get as nicely here. Like things are just going to kind of bounce into each other. I wonder if we could add a lot of stickiness in. 5 stickiness is usually enough to notice. 50 stickiness should be enough to. Yeah, yeah, that's fun. Bump, 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 bump. Stickiness is cool. Yeah. Something else to mention, I guess, while we're here is what's really fun about this technique is it'd be really easy to have a mesh that we're throwing in here like deform a little bit too much and make a really like ugly looking object. So if I were to just grab both these randoms and say that they can go further, so I'm intentionally pushing it so that a lot of these, you see, they're going to kind of crisscross and pass right through themselves, so you don't end up with very much volume. So what we do want to do is make sure our cloner has enough space so that they never intersect, because we don't ever want that. But we can still put these just into a volume mesher, and it's still going to successfully mesh them. Now, because some of them might crisscross themselves and get really thin, it could be a good idea in your volume builder to add in a dilate and erode. So if we do that, it's going to now inflate it by whatever amount we type in here. So you can see it'll just inflate a little bit, but a little bit can go a long way. So you see this became more solid. So it's like, oh, these are now even significantly more complicated rocks than they might have been otherwise. And it just turns into a stylistic choice. Like, how messy do you want your rocks to potentially look? And even continuing to layer that stuff up, before we have the dilate, you could do a open and close. So that should, as we increase that, you're going to see it's going to try and make it so that what's essentially like a little C shape, like kind of here, you see we get a bit of a C shape. It's going to try and fill those shapes in a little bit more. It seems to change it quite a bit because we're not very subdivided. But, that can fill in some holes. We need a little more space. And then we could inflate a little bit after that. And even then, that between the two of them, they actually seem to clean these up quite a bit. But now that we've done that, actually, I guess the way I'll show it is in the volume. If we turn off that open and close, you can see that we can still end up with these rocks with like very sharp edges and whatnot. So, but you know, feel free to add in a smoothing field. You're gonna want to use a light touch here, but like a little bit of smoothing is really gonna round off those edges. So you combine all three of those, and the smooth is gonna go a really long way to like taking off hard edges. And of course, the more detailed you make your volume, the more you're gonna maintain the shape. So you see that we get some, you know, lovely, completely randomized things, and we're just letting them pass right through each other, or right through themselves. Remesh that to a low poly, and you get lovely 100% randomized rocks or beans or whatever the case may be. I mean, I've done, and you know, even that becomes the beginning where you could push this further and further, where you know you could be like, okay, well that's the raw mesh, to now create more clones to build into another volume mesher, into another remesher. What's a good way of explaining, like, as a we're going off the rails here, but if we just push that a little bit further. Rock builder. Yeah, so we've got this entire collection here, but I could say, I might, do I want to bake them down? Can I keep them parametric? I don't think I can keep them parametric. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to make that editable, and we could select all, and does it give us a command? No. Shift-C, explode? Explode segments. Does that work? No. Is it polygon? There's a command I can never remember the name of. Yeah, there it is. Polygon islands to objects. So if we do that, now it's exploded every single one of those into their own mesh. And if we select them, yeah, their axis is not properly set up, but we could do the axis center thing. Or, is this a good idea? Well, we could do the axis thing, but yeah, let's do center axis. Shift-C again. Axis, is it axis center? Still, I think they changed. Oh, it is still axis center. There it is. Double click on that. I think it's always just the default one. Yeah, default one. Just click it, execute. Now you see the axis actually jump to the center. So now, here's a thought: is like, okay, now we've got a cloner, and we've cloned all of. What do I want to do? Let's feed all these into a single cloner. Nope, single cloner. I'll make them disappear. Okay, so now those have moved. Now we've got kind of these new rocks here. So it's like, okay, that's the basis of our rocks. And then I'll say, okay, well, if that's the basis of our rock right here, what if I have a cloner? I say, I want to clone onto those objects. So the object I want to clone onto is this connect. So now we're randomly cloning the rocks we just made onto the surface. And we could, you know, put a random, we could spin, we could, you know, make additional chaotic base shapes to be cloning onto. And in this case, I'd probably like make significantly larger boulders, probably with significantly more distance between them, like so. And we could clone as many onto the surface as we want, and then you can just get like all these extra details. And once you've done that, that could get dropped into its own connect here. So we connect all of those down, and then we volume builder, which turns all these into one big blob. It's still running all the same rules. Let's put it at the bottom. You see how that instantly smooths out, gets rid of some of those. And, you know, now we got more complicated boulders that we could subdivide more, drop down further. We can grab this one and just clone like way more. Let's clone 1,000 on there. It's gonna take a second, but yeah, now you see I've got a whole bunch of little boulders cloning onto this one. We could displace and deform and go completely crazy, but yeah, all these interesting bloppy shapes. Remesh those. And, you know, there we go. Well, I made that editable, but, you know, we have so much control for, like, layering up these types of rigs now and creating infinite randomness within certain rule sets. So, yeah, just wanted to talk through that a little bit. Let's see. Where's that one? Arbin. been checking this out, trying to achieve this. Never lucky enough. Let's see what we got. Mute. All right, so we got motion trash or Beto. Okay, I think it's motion trash. So we haven't had a question from their work, so I always appreciate that. Okay, so what we got? We got a rock. Oh, interesting. We got most interesting. I like it. Okay, well this, it says it's Cinema 4D. Those are leaving a trail behind everywhere they go. The part that's throwing me off is that they are, they are successfully passing through. This is first of all, very clever. So we got a couple concepts to even prove if they are concepts that work. So I'll start out with a icosahedron. We'll crank up the poly count a bit and just start out with a simple n side with a bunch of sides. Okay. Turn that into a sweep. Feed it another n side, 12, radius of 5. Yeah, radius of 5. Perfect. Crank this up until it is significantly subdivided. Okay. This is going to get challenging. This is going to be a rope simulation. This will be a collider. That's not going to stay our collider. But here's the thought. If we allow... Whoa, what's going on there? What? Oh, that makes sense. I had the tag on the wrong one. Okay, so that falls. It's all good. So we need something to permanently say, hey, something traveled here. Pretty much the only thing I can think of that can do that is a tracer. So if we make a tracer and I say trace, yeah, it's tracing all the vertices and everything. If I hit play, that should, oh, that is not tracing those vertices. Can we feed that into a connect and then tell it to trace the connect? Yes. Okay. So there's that annoying tracer pop that we have to like reset in a particular way. But you can see now that we get these lines, and these lines are kind of saying like, oh, here's everywhere that line sort of existed in the past. So if we were to feed those into a volume builder, volume mesher, just as a concept, which is pretty cool by itself, you can see that we get this blob that is going to rewind. To properly get the tracer reset, you have to rewind, go forward a frame, rewind a frame, and now it should pretty much be correct. Now you see I kind of get this liquidy echo that's traveling everywhere that rope did. So immediately it's going to be creating a really wonky mesh. But now, and like I said, this is not trivial. We need that to be, oh, I need to start decreasing how thick this is. 7, maybe just a little bit larger than our thing. So we end up with a mesh like that. And then I'm trying to think, maybe the result we saw was one way. Everybody here is on the same page that bools can sometimes give us messy results. But the only thing I can think of immediately is that we put that into a bool and we have A subtract B, and B can be given a material so it stands out. Let's see. Yeah, so when that strikes, do you see how we get a bool out of it? And now that bool is going to, it's erasing out. So right away, that's a pretty cool effect. And the bool is doing a reasonably good job right now. So everywhere that mesh went, it's biting out from it. But then here's the super duper dangerous part. I have no idea what's going to happen. And we will save. Volume bool rope sim. Might as well add in another color or two. We have to make the resulting geometry the actual collider. Now, in theory, we're only ever subtracting from it, but what happens now? Bonk. Hey, all right. Starting to feel better about this as the process because it's almost reacting in the same way, where it's slowly sinking through. So that's making me more confident that this is actually the process. So yeah, that was now able to melt its way through kind of roughly. Yeah, that actually worked shockingly well. I'm now significantly confident that this is actually the way to do it. Likely the way that they did. Very, very clever. I like the idea. So let's make another. Pull that one up in the air. And let's both run. So yeah, you kind of get that frame of lag as it tries to catch up. It's pretty cool. Yeah, look at that. Pretty weird. So I want to make, let's make this our own a little bit because the concept is working. So we'll save that, start working on another version. So here's my thought. Let's temporarily turn off that so we just get this single mesh. And I think we can probably put that into a cloner, move this onto the cloner. That will still see the end result. Clone radially, 0 offset. All those can get zeroed out. And then random position, yeah. Rotation, yeah. 720. Rotate, rotate, rotate. And scale, uniform, absolute. We let some shrink until I don't want to quite intersect. Okay, so that is an idea. And now that's still going to be the collider. Turn off gravity. Scene, 0 gravity. Simulation, I want a field force. So this field force is going to have a significant amount of power. And the first thing I want to do is say that it's going to be pulling inward. For everything else it does, I want everything to constantly pull inward. Remapping, inner, nope, full power pretty much the whole way. Okay, so this should either be pulling in or out. Let's hit play and see what we get. Okay, yeah, it's pulling in. Need more frames. Oh, let's also turn off, oh, I did turn off the tracer. So you see all these lines are squishing and they're able to move. Maybe this bool isn't returning the sphere, so I will temporarily move that there. So everything, generally speaking, wants to pull inward, and now they'll collide with the surface. So, you know, that's good. Each of these is the same thickness. So our thickness is 5. So let's say that these are radius 5. So they shouldn't be able to pass through each other. They should collide. Yeah, they're properly colliding like noodles. And then let's add in just a nice simple turbulence. Big old 55%, large scale, turbulence with some frequency. Okay, nice, very strong. Drop it to 15. Okay, yeah, so we get these randomly kind of writhing around. Still a little strong. I'll say 5 because I still want them, as a general rule, to want to pull inward. But let's do 10. Hard to find the balance here. Yeah. Okay, that's pretty much what I want. Sweep. Might as well give that a color. Yeah. Field force. We could have done more with that, but let's just leave that where it is. Display don't. Cool. Spherical field. No, thank you. Okay, so now we got those, and they all want to go do their thing. Okay, so we should be able to turn on our tracer. We're going to get kind of a similar end fun effect where we get these cool tracing lines, each, you know, showing the path where it's traveled, which by itself is already kind of a cool thing. And you could limit that so you kind of get this slowly revealing one. Also, that would mean that these could reseal themselves back up again, so keep that in mind. But then we can do the volume, so immediately turn those on. And, oh, but not the bool, not yet. So this is the swirly blob that we're getting. Now, something that's, we want the radius to be slightly larger than the original thing. Now, you still get that 1 frame of lag, but I do think it is slightly larger. We can make it even larger if we wanted to. And I know this volume is kind of overwhelming at a glance, but now we got that going. So, do the bool. And now it bools out. And now, where it's scraping the surface, it's actually removing material. So right away, that's kind of a cool thing too. So let's put the collider back on there. And here's sort of just our own slight version here where they're all kind of wiggly and fighting. But these will still strike, and you see it's starting to sink in. Now, the turbulence might make it drift away, but it's going to have kind of been digging through a little bit. And just because it's digging through, it might kind of get trapped in that area a little bit. So let's just let it run a little bit and see what we get. Scraping, we get that. Does seem like we are getting an effective frame of lag. I don't have it very subdivided. And I think it might be a good idea. There's a lot of volume that's happening outside of this thing. Thinking, oh, the mouse, come on, you can do it. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot to ask of a bool. Pause. Okay. So you will see that if I turn the bool off, that we got an awful lot of geometry that we're throwing at that bool. Might be a good idea to make a duplicate of our sphere and put this also into the volume builder and say, okay, only where these two intersect does it actually try and generate anything. And I'll expand this out a little bit so you can see we get this smaller blob, which just means there's a lot less geometry for the volume to worry about, because all we're showing is it's still kind of seeing all of that stuff it was generating, but I'm saying, but only actually create geometry where those are intersecting. That means a lot less work for our bool, which should mean faster to calculate. I also think I'm going to increase our radius a bit, just maybe up to 8. We could subdivide the voxels more, but that's just going to make the collider be slower, etc. So, yeah, let's not do that. And I'm also going to make get rid of the bounce and add lots of friction onto this, so it's going to be less inclined to slide around, maybe. Okay, save again. Bool. Frame forward, frame back, hit play. Ooh, better already. Look at that. Look at that. Lovely. The very nature of the volume builder does mean it's a little twitchy in the way it moves, but that is pretty cool immediately. Like, look at that. Even that is a still. Let's make that interior. Bool. Oh no, that bool is made up of these. What's going on here? Oh, there's materials I put on there. Just try to make these pop a little bit more. We'll go white. So increasing the resolution would go a long way because I feel like right now you almost feel like that's living a little bit, where it's like it kind of melts in and then melts back out again. It should never feel like it can melt out. You saw a single bad Boolean frame there. That's always a chance that you get those. But this is doing an amazing job of eating away at this little kind of planet. But still colliding with it, so pretty cool. Yeah, look at that. Pretty neat. It'd be kind of fun if these, if all these little tubes were a volume themselves. So like that volume, if these were blobbing into each other, I think that might make a nice, might make for a nice look. But yeah, it's doing a perfect job. I think it's gotten all the way through to the core here. It's gotten to the center. It's running reasonably well. So I am going to increase our volume. What am I doing? Volume builder. Drop this to 3. Let's click this. So yeah, the more detail we have there, the better it will look. That's fine. This should probably increase up to, I don't know, 64. Give that a slightly more stable triangle. That radius we did here, tracer, increase this to 0.2 and decrease the radius back to 7. Yeah, so that's enough to eat through, but maybe not quite as quick. Yeah, let's, if the volume will have it, let's try feeding it in. Volume builder, volume mesher. Blurp. Connect, view as a radius of 6. And our voxel will be of 5. 3. Ooh, okay, this actually is good information. This density of 0.1, I increased it. You see how these are only sampling every so many distance? So I'm going to say, the other one I put the 0.2, which that's why I did, and we couldn't tell what it was doing. But now when I typed in 0.2, you saw it filled in a lot more. I'm going to say 0.3, and that fills in a little bit even more. That makes me more confident that this was a good move. Makes that a little bit more solid. Now, are those intersecting? No, they're not quite touching. So we could increase the radius a little bit or leave a little bit of space between them. I'm not sure if we'd actually want them to look like they're like intersecting. That this intersection here, whatever this volume builder is doing, has no effect on the actual geometry. So, you know, them being big enough to actually be touching the surface is probably a good thing because you see what's left behind. And I don't know if it'll help the look, but I always put in a smoothing. And here we can go pretty light. Let's do like 1 or 2 layers of smoothing just to round them out a bit. And let's make another material. Ooh, there we go. Like that color. We'll make that one rough. That can be shiny. And let's throw an HDR in here and render it out. Why not? So it's a cool effect. This was again by Motion Trash. Very, very cool. Very inspiring. So volume blobbies. Render output redshift. That's fine. Keep it low. Redshift. It's going to be rough. We'll say 0.5. Save. Don't worry about saving. I think that's fine. Rewind. 1 frame forward, 1 frame back. To fix the tracer, hopefully. Because the tracer's still being a tracer. Go. Oh, I forgot to put an HDR. That's pretty important, I think. We'll do a nice simple outdoor one. I didn't have that one downloaded. Whoops. Do we have follow-up questions on this one, which is working very well? We got another half hour to go. We can continue playing around with this, or we could move on to another question for sure. Patsy is asking or saying it would look cool if we hid the ropes. I agree. It would just be kind of doing this nice Boolean eating out of the surface and the interior. The reason I like seeing the rope is I feel like in the past we could have been like, oh, here's a blob and we'll bool it out. Where here, it's the act of seeing a rope eat out from the surface that's making it kind of unique. Oof, okay. I didn't know I didn't have that HDR installed. It took a long time. The ZBrush ones, actually kind of, in a weird way, I like the ZBrush ones because they're smaller. Like, they're not as high resolution. But for the most part, I don't care about the image. You see how quick that loaded in? So, yeah, I'm fine with that. We'll turn it off in the background. Just let that shaded version float in space and be reflective. And let's make that internal material glow a bit. Yeah, this purple can have 0.5 pinky glow. Cool. Okay, close, save, minimize. Picture viewer, nope. Let's just see what we get after a few frames. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to calculate. Yeah. Any follow-ups for continuing this one? Obviously, there's so many different effects. All the different ways we could make these ropes be traveling. We could be. This technique would work with a lot of different things because it's essentially accounting for where an object currently is and where it used to be. Like it's an echoing effect. The tracer does a really good job of that, but if we had a properly, it would slow down, but if we had a properly subdivided thing, like you have a piece of text, and that piece of text could slide through the object, and the tracer is actually what's leaving splines behind, which would just take a bite out of it as well. Can anybody think of another way of like kind of leaving past versions of itself? There is like the Mo graph, it's like the Mo instance or something, which I've never really used. I've never had a need to, but one of the problems is if you took text and then you animated the text to kind of pass through an object, even if every single frame left an iteration of itself behind, it wouldn't catch the spots in between. So like if something moved quickly, let's say you have, I get my phone. It's like if the phone is here one frame and it's here the next frame, then it didn't exist in this in-between spot. And so that's a weakness of like a Mo instance type concept. But by doing it with a spline, the spline will make the connection from one spot to the next one automatically. So it does fill in those gaps, or at least it does a reasonably good job of filling in the spot in between the two. We got first contact hitting the surface. I can see the tiniest hint of a glow right there. I put all that turbulence on there, that might end up being not as nice of it just kind of like pulling in via gravity, but maybe it's good. I don't know. We'll see. We'll let go a little bit further. Let's see. Would a Voronoi fracture help? I know this earlier you're talking Brawlius, but would a Voronoi fracture help? I'm not sure what... I'm not quite sure at what point you were saying that, but in what way do you think a Voronoi fracture could help here? Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if this is what you're saying, but you just inspired something else that we can, a quick tweak we can do for a completely different rig, but the same concept. Benjamin is asking what GPU do I have. My computer's getting a little bit older. I have two 1080s in it right now, so not horrible, but definitely not cutting edge. So yeah, I typically don't do much rendering, so keep that in mind. Yeah, it's going to need to render a little bit longer to you know, really kind of show off the effect. And in retrospect, it might have been a bad idea to make the interior glowy. We'll just have to find out. Probably better to make the worms glowy. Yeah, that's already a better idea. We make this, and I should probably name these. This will be glow, and this is surface, and this is red. But if we made the interior red and then the worms glow, revealing kind of like that darker inside, that could be kind of like crusty and crunchy and whatnot, I think it would look a little bit better. But I'll let that keep rendering for a little bit while I talk about some other concepts, or a alternative concept with volume stuff inspired by a question from Bralius. So I'll save that because it's working. Maybe C. Would the collisions work too? I don't know. Okay, so in this version, I don't think we need any of that. Okay, that's not true. We need this. So I'll make a copy of that sphere outside. We might need that stuff, so I don't want to completely kill it. So then, inspired by the question, we feed that into a Voronoi fracture, a heavily subdivided Voronoi fracture. And, you know, that can create some slowdown, but let's just see what happens. 555. Nope. 2,000. All right, now we're talking. Even that doesn't seem that subdivided. Let's turn that off for a little bit as well. I think it would be kind of fun to get rid of this outermost layer. And we've done that before. And I think we can do that pretty easily. If I say plane effector, scale, uniform, absolute, -1, make things disappear. And then say it's based on a field. If we want to be smart, we could make a separate model, but I'm just going to feed in this sphere itself and say based on the points. And as we increase the radius, you're going to see I can shrink down these outer ones. And if we say that clamp has to either be on or off with a quantize of 1, you now see I've scaled down everything that fell within a certain radius of the outside. It just gets rid of it. And if we go just far enough so that everything erases, you see that we end up with this kind of popped surface where the entire thing is filled with a whole bunch of different volumes. I mean, I still, even here, I want like more subdivisions. Yeah, that's more what I want. But I'm afraid that this is going to start. It's going to start to get too slow. But now that I did subdivide that further, it means that the plane probably needs less radius. Yeah, we just want to get rid of enough that we don't see any surface ones, or not enough to realize they're surface ones. So something like that. Then we got all those lines traveling through. This is where it gets maybe a little trickier, because we got this Voronoi fracture. And we're going to make another plane. And it's going to be actually very similar. I'm going to say it's going to affect the scale, uniform, absolute, -1. But this one is going to be based on the splines. Set that to not be curved, but instead be based on the radius. And the radius is of 10. And this is the radius fall off. So I think we probably want a very rapid fall off. If, essentially, okay, so that's not all we need to do. The last thing we want to do, I think, is add a decay of 100%. So now the idea is if the line gets within 10 units of one of these, it will scale down to 0. And decay will remember that scale down to 0. We don't need that tracer chasing them around anymore, because the individual points are going to remember if something got near to them or not. Now the radius is 10, but these are quite large, so we actually have to get to the center point of them for it to be able to trigger. But let's just see what happens. I might have already saved, but I'm going to save again. Voronoi. And these aren't colliders yet, but let's just see what happens. Oh, it's running reasonably well. Let's see if they disappear. They do. Oh, yeah, look. Okay, yeah, so these are indeed erasing out. That's actually doing a very nice job. I was thinking we needed to be able to collide with it, but I'm just erasing them out. So those are shrinking down. Once they start shrinking, I feel like they should finish shrinking. Because, you know, they get tiny, but I think they should go down to nothing. We've got two options there. One is we just let them pop to nothing. One is, and this will be erase. How do I say this? So that's decaying them down as remembering that they got decayed. We can either have them pop out of existence by doing the exact same technique again. So we do another quantize and we drop that down to one step. So now it's either on or it's off. So as these pass through, it's kind of like, oh, okay, you hit a threshold in which you shrunk down to nothing, and you see that they did indeed disappear. But it seems like less of them are. Now we can fix that a bit by going to this connect and increasing the radius, or also decreasing this fall off. I don't think we'll see too much of a change, but if I shrink that a bit, also it's happening over time. I guess we should remember that. So yeah, I think increasing the radius a bit, but we have to start over in order to see it properly. So now what's going to happen is they don't shrink down to nothing. They'll just suddenly cease to be there. I kind of like them shrinking more. I'll say that, but you know, it is a method in which they are shrinking, or they're just popping out of existence by shrinking down to nothing. Voronoi fracture. Don't give us colors. I think it'll look a little bit nicer if we're just viewing the surface. These planes are giving color. Got those back in the sweep. Yeah, so as this travels through, you can see it's actually erasing them out. That was one option. As it passes through, it's going to remember them being gone, and it's just erasing them out, passes right through. It's got no collision with them whatsoever, so the worms are free to do whatever they want. You know, so kind of cool. I think them shrinking down is going to be a little bit better, though. So no quantize. They'll still remember shrinking, but I don't know if I'm going to... I got to remember the technique to do what I want to do. So as these pass through, you see it start shrinking. What I'd like them to do is shrink just the way they are, but keep on going. Like if they were hit, yeah, keep on going. So get rid of the quantize and try a freeze. Set to add. And I want it to grow, but with a tiny, tiny radius. And then I'll say increase by 10%. So I don't know for sure, but the hope is that the radius is so small that they can only see themselves. And it's like, oh, wait, I see myself, and I've got a certain amount of weight. So add to that weight. But I don't know. I have to clear it, or I have to clear this initial freeze because it was remembering the initial value. So let's see what happens now. Oh, hey. I got it in a single guess. Cool. So now they shrink away and they stay away. They keep on shrinking. So we could change this effect strength to like 2%. So as they pass through, as it passes through, it's going to take it's going to go even slower as it fades away. But yeah, now they fade away, which I think looks nicer. And those all shrink. That's all just based on the radius from them. And essentially, it's running pretty well. So I'm going to dangerously, let's get rid of everything we don't need because everything's working. That pulls in. Turbulence is still working. That's still doing something. I just want more fracture. So I'm going to put a 1 in front, which is going to triple the amount. But now it's tripled. It should have more detail, which means in this plane, erase. This radius can be smaller, so I'm going to say 8 because there's just more of them. So I expect, but again, we're not colliding with it, so it's just the Voronoi fracture doing their calculation. If those were also collider bodies, this would be going significantly slower. Yeah, now there's more resolution. So you see them pass through, but it's not erasing out huge swaths now. Does anybody play Deep Rock Galactic? Like some of the interiors that this is leaving behind are making me think a little bit of Deep Rock. Because that's voxel based. And we get these cool like caves. But yeah, I'm not sure, Brawlius, if this is kind of what you were referring to, but yeah, it's a different effect that does look cool. Let's take a look at our render. Yeah, I definitely think I should have done not emissive in the middle. But let's just see. Eating away, eating away. It doesn't pop too much. Yeah, it goes by quick. Doesn't pop, but yeah. I like the eating away of the surface. It's pretty cool. I mean, that's the whole thing. But what I mean is, like, when it goes deep, we get like these big caves. But I kind of like when it just scrapes the surface a little bit. If we made more turbulence, etc. Blob, blob, blob. Yeah, a couple things I did here. I like a little bit less, like these blobs. I think I like them better as individual ropes. But yeah, pretty cool. Stop that from rendering. Very, 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 very good question. I liked it. It's a very inspiring piece. I like some, I like where somebody pushed some of the simulation concepts in a new direction I had never seen before. Let's see. We got about 20 minutes. Yeah, still rendering on GPU while simulating on GPU. Oh, create fractures. Yeah, that's a different. That would be different as well. Would that even be able to? Yeah, each one would be a point. Yeah, they'd be constantly. I think that would work. I don't think it would visually look the way you think it might look. Okay, so I understand a little bit more. Maybe what Brawlius was mentioning. We're going to simplify. I'm going to make a single line. Okay, so we got a single line. And then the idea is, instead of the Voronoi fracture using this point distribution, it's going to that's weird. Oh, that's weird. It hiccuped. It's going to create new fractures. Now, the only way to create new fractures and have them remember is to essentially do that tracer technique. So we go back to, that has to be in a connect. Don't weld. Tracer. Tracing all of those lines, which is just kind of what you do now. So yeah, you get that. So this is generating like a lot of points. So if we go into the Voronoi fracture and we say that the source is going to be the tracer, right now it's an even distribution of 20, but we could say step, I think. So now, oh, that's interesting. Why? It's a distribution of step, but it's not giving us a number. How can you give us a distribution of step but not give us a step amount? That's not quite working the way I wanted to. So I was going to say a step we could skip, but now I guess not skip, is I'm going to create a matrix on the object, and the object will be this connect. Honestly, we might not even need to be the connect. That might be able to be directly on the end side. So I want this to create step of every 10. How big is this? Every 5 per segment. What? Oh. Tracer. There we go. Okay, every 20? Yeah, even that's not a lot. I'm going to say every 10. So now you can see that what's happening is, as this runs through, we're constantly creating new matrix objects everywhere. So now we can say, well, every one of those matrix objects is going to behave as a Voronoi fracture source point. But immediately you're going to see that we're going to get a lot of weirdness. Like if we start looking at the surface here, that these are already creating cuts, even if they're far away. And it seems like the Voronoi fracture can't handle quite this many at these weird distances. But we're going to like keep on going. And I'm going to say, your factor, yeah, it's still doing this erasy stuff. I'm going to say don't worry about doing that. I'm going to keep the outside one, but say you are not limited by that. And instead, I'm going to say just shrink down to minus 0.1. Okay, so now each chunk is just going to shrink down. Actually, no, what am I doing? don't do that. Just have the Voronoi do it. Offset fragments 1. Okay, so now we can just see a gap between each one. Okay, so now you can see a bunch of matrices are being made. You see all the different cuts that are being made. So as this continues, I imagine it's going to get very slow very quickly. But you can see it's creating brand new matrix subdivisions every single time we make a new one. And I guess, well, unsurprisingly in some ways, but matrix, the way Voronoi fractures get subdivided it's never quite as intuitive as you think it's going to be, because it's constantly trying to make each one of those a center point. Like each of those isn't representing where a line is going to be. It's representing possibly the center point of a chunk. And so this is starting to look like an armadillo, like a balled up armadillo here. And as it continues, like, yeah, we're getting more and more subdivisions, but it's not super visually coherent, essentially. It's even less coherent than I thought it would be. It's interesting, but I don't know what I would do with it, especially when you consider that you wouldn't actually be viewing the tracer, and you wouldn't actually be viewing this matrix object. So really, you'd just be seeing this, where it's like all those little cuts got made, and then these are kind of popping in and out of existence. Even that's kind of funny, because over here, in that first frame where they suddenly exist, it's a perfect circle, and every matrix is equivalently far apart, so we end up getting like an entire sphere here, each shrunk down a little bit. But as soon as we go a couple of frames in, certain points have gotten closer than other ones. So other ones, we're actually getting fewer chunks because now there's closer points, all continuing to be very deeply unintuitive. Yeah, it's interesting, but deeply unintuitive. I'll just do a count of 1 per segment. So now we just get, I'm going to say have that be on the end. Don't loop. And there. So now it's kind of constantly follow the line. So now we're not creating a bunch of matrices. There's always just the one. And we see them each moving around. Like, that's kind of cool. I kind of like this pattern. That's neat. Yeah, that's fun and organic. If you just showed, essentially even here, we don't need to see the matrix and we don't need to see the sweep. If you just showed me this, I'd be like, I'm not quite sure how they made that, but you know, that is making something pretty cool looking. Swirling and organic, ever evolving. So yeah, that's cool. Not quite the same thing, but I like it. We got just a little bit of time. Let's see. Let's see, Travis, if you threw that Voronoi fracture into a volume builder, that would be cool. That comment could have been from a little while ago. So I imagine, and this is probably dangerous, but let's just go back to the file. ABCD. Imagine that you meant this one. And you're saying if this Voronoi fracture was put into a volume, let's just see what happens. If we do that, can it handle it? It's very low poly, or the volume builder is very low poly because the voxel size is so large, but I think there's so many individual volumes it's having to step through and do a calculation on every single one, and it does not seem happy about it. Yeah, I think it might have froze up just from sheer calculation. So, yep, I don't think that's a direction we're going to explore. Dutch Shane is asking about creating puffy cloth with wrinkles like this. Oh, I don't think we're gonna have time to tackle anything like this. But you just got a nice fluffy winter jacket. I feel like EJ might have done some stuff, like kind of with his Mylar balloon type thing. Honestly, in some ways, is it just you need to weld points together. Like, tell me if I'm on the, yeah, that's probably frozen. I tried hitting escape, but escape works like 1 out of 10 times to actually wake up. So tell me if I'm wrong. When it comes to that type of fabric, if you were sewing, let's go even more literal. If you were sewing a jacket sleeve, that's all poofy, like the reference, is it not essentially exactly what we're looking at here? And like every once in a while, it's like, oh, this is all, it's like a big fluffy pillow. You see that everything we're seeing here, this volume is like, it's filled with stuffing. And then every once in a while, you would just take a needle and you'd be like, well, that needle's going to connect from one side to the interior equivalent, and then just kind of weave back and forth, 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 until you could just kind of make individual little pockets. So essentially, I think that's what you want to do. So then it turns into, how do we actually weld one bunch to the other? And I'm trying to think of a way to cheat it. I mean, I'm going to do let's do a super duper quick cheat. This is not actually, if I was modeling something, this is not the way I would do it. I'm going to arbitrarily do a couple of circles here. I'll even intentionally space them a little bit differently. And then T for scale, turn off Y, and I'm going to scale them in. And honestly, I bet we can scale them in just the tiniest little, actually, no, I can't do the tiniest amount. It has to be significant, I think. But I don't want to do it that way. That's not the way I want to do it. I want to I wonder if I'm going to cheat. Okay, this is super cheating. Or I just don't know what's going to happen here. So I'm going to eyeball it, but here's the thought. If I scale these way down, I'm going to scale them down until you see, eventually they'd be exactly on their neighbors. I'm going to put them very close to their neighbor, like that. And then we're going to add a cloth tag on here. Cloth, and then I'm going to add on the connect. And now here's the cheating part. I'm going to say it can connect to the same object. And I'm going to say, go ahead and give me a preview of it. And if we go inside here, if I start increasing this, you see a connection was suddenly made from there to there, because those are now the closest points on the entire object. So those connections have now been established. So now if I go back to my tube and I scale these back out again, those connections are still there. Like, those are still welded. So that was where I said I'm going to cheat. So now we've got those weld points going. I'm going to say, okay, balloon, you are being pressured. Let's even overpressure it by 2. I'm just going to play to start out and see what happens. Oh, gravity's going to be on, so let's get rid of that. Simulation scene 0. Play. Okay, so even just them being welded at all is doing this. So not terrible. I don't know how much is pinching or pulling. Let's go back to this pressure. I'm going to say 1, so not super overpressured. So, okay, that's going to maintain it. So now we go here, and I'm going to say I want the length of these to be 50% of what they currently are. So that is going to attempt to pinch those in. Yeah, so those attempt to pinch in 50% of the distance. So now I'll say go in 90% of the distance. Now I just kind of pop into that position, but you can now see I was able to weld those together and get those little pinches going, and now you got these fluffy different parts of the coat. That's my thought. I think that's how you would go about doing it. I just, in my head, I can't think of a really easy way of saying, well, just grab these pins and then put on the equivalent to the opposite. Maybe you could do that with like a belt tag on its own object, but I just don't have a good instinct for it. So this was a way of proving that, yes, this is a concept that you can do. I just don't know how I do it. The interior looks great because there's not enough room for them to all fit, so it's pinching more. Because as we squish them in, there's not enough, or there's still 100% pressure, so it's inflating these other parts to compensate for this pinched out part here. But yeah, I'd be curious if somebody can do an experiment with like a belt tag or something and make those properly link to each other, or only go to the opposite. There is a point restriction. Maybe let's try the point restriction. This is working pretty well. I'll save this as the basic kind of fluffy coat. So here's a thought. Instead of cheating the way I just said, what if we select these ranges of points? So I'll make a rectangle selection. It is able to pass through. So now I'm making this selection this way, and I'm passing right through. So I'm grabbing the inside and the outside. So then selection, store selection. So that's a selection. Inside here, I'm gonna, like, you know, as soon as I do anything, I've now broken those connections. They're not connected anymore. So I'm gonna say, okay, keep on, I'm just gonna keep cranking this up until suddenly everything's connecting to everything. I'm gonna say, no, only these points can connect. Now, I guess there is still a small problem in that they're connecting to each other very directly. That could definitely create a problem. But if we do this, try to get the right angle. It's hard to see. Okay, you see we got here, and then there's some on the opposite. If I keep on increasing and increasing and increasing, oh yeah, they're still connecting even more to each other. But eventually, oh goodness, it's a big distance. Oh, and there's a max connections. Well, there we go. If I crank this up enough, eventually, yeah, there's no way it needs to be that big. Okay, as soon as we get above 50, there's enough to actually jump the bridge from one point to the opposite side. But they're still connecting directly to their neighbor. I can't think of a great way to stop that immediately. But all the other stuff still applies now, although I'm interested how these pinches are going to happen as we drop the whole thing down to 10%. So now there's less cheating. But now all this stuff is pinching in a lot. Yeah, so it's grabbing its direct neighbors and pulling in. Looks a little different, but it's not bad. Like, they're fluffier. We could potentially go easier on the, you know, their final length here. But yeah, even a little bit goes a long way. But yeah, well, actually a little bit, you know, does a pretty decent job. And I feel like, yeah, because these outer ones are pinching in, we actually are starting to get some implied wrinkles going. That's kind of fun. Yeah, I'd be curious of other people's thoughts on that, but it does create an interesting shape relatively easily. Like, even my first technique, like, obviously it's not adaptive. You do it once, and then if you ever need to make a change, you kind of break everything. But it did work. Let me see if anybody in the chat has a brighter idea than I did. Yeah. On the subject of the volume builder, if you have an animated volume builder, that's a previous thing, but on the subject of the volume builder, if you had an animated volume builder, how would you go about applying a texture without it swimming? Essentially, there is no way to apply a texture without swimming. Your best option in the volume is doing stuff with the vertex maps, referencing some perpetual object on the outside. But yeah, materials are either going to be projected via some projection, like a flat projection, in which case it's going to swim, but it's going to be coherent in the way it's projected. You can't do UVs because UV is constantly shifting to something new. There's no relationship between one state and the next one because there's completely new point count, completely new positions. There's no way of relating one thing to the other. And then just doing stuff with volumes is probably the most coherent way. So just if you haven't seen it, here's the 2-minute version where if I guess we should put a slightly more interesting shape. Okay, there you go. Slightly more interesting. Volume mesher, volume builder, which I did backwards. So we get a mesh here. We're going to want it to be decently subdivided. Now, we could do this directly on this volume mesher. We could. Actually, yeah, I'll leave it that way. And now I'll make a cube, shrink, put that inside as well. Okay, so let's say that we want this cube to be a color. So like seriously, a particular color. We can do that. And I guess maybe I will make a... We could try making a checkerboard, but it would pass through the checkerboard. It would be coherently on the checkerboard, but it would be passing through. Problem is I don't know that there's a... I don't think that there is a checkerboard material. There's not a checkerboard like grid or pattern. Is there any kind of pattern? I don't think that there is. So instead I'm going to search for media. I'm going to search for the word UV. And we'll grab this UV text grid. Yeah, UV test grid. And yeah, we'll do that in a moment. So before we even get there, here's the idea. I shall say I want to make a volume. On the volume builder, I want to add an other tag. The other tag will be, you can either do a vertex map, in this case a vertex color. So I want this to be driven by fields, which it already is turned on by default. So if I grab my cube and drop it in, I can say I want this to be based on the surface of the cube, and under color remap we can set this to be whatever color. So you can now see that that is red based on a fall off. It is based on the fall off from the surface, which is not even going to necessarily be mathematically super accurate. You'll see as I increase this that those corners aren't quite being caught. So even the surface calculation is not quite there. You could say points, but even points are probably going to be even less so. You can see that, actually, yeah, it's based on the points of the object. And actually that makes sense on the surface because it's looking at the original object, and the original object isn't rounded, or this one is. But anyway, there's an easy way of making it. It's like, okay, well that is now orange, and we can drag in this shape, and we say, oh, this shape is also based on the surface, and that surface will be large enough, and that one will be blue. So now I could, you have to keep it selected, unfortunately, to see here, but I can grab this object, and you see I can move it around, and it's staying blue, and where they blob into each other, you can actually see the colors will blend. They're going to blend based on this mixing we've got here. So it's set to normal. If we said multiply, they're going to darken on top of each other. If we say overlay, or even better, screen, they're going to add on top of each other. So it's actually brighter where they meet. So you got all sorts of different combination options. So that's the basics of being able to maintain a color doing volume stuff. It's because it's constantly, every single frame, it's as if it has zero information, and then it gets brand new information, and the brand new information is where saying, hey, wherever this cube is from the surface, make this red color. So there's no coherency between frames. So based on the same principle, if we say that the cube is going to be entirely white, and we're building an alpha here, and we'll say the other shape, it will be completely black. That becomes an alpha map for us. And now we can drop on this material. And if we plug this in, can we see? Okay, yeah, we get this grid. And it's based on UV mapping. It looks like it's just making up some UVs. I'm going to say cubic. So now we got a cubic projection. So I'm going to say, okay, you're actually the color channel. And there is a... we're going to limit that to a vertex attribute. And in this vertex attribute, I'm going to out the color. I guess we could put it in a lot of places. I'm going to try just doing the opacity. And we're going to link to our vertex color map. And I don't know that that shows up in the viewport. So can I output that as color? Yeah, that goes through there. So as a way of maybe seeing the viewport, I'm just going to say layer. So I'll make a color layer. So let's say that that is the base color, and this will be the secondary color. And the secondary color is set to normal over. I'm going to say add. Maybe it can't handle, maybe these can't pass through successfully into viewport if we redshift render view it. Yeah, so we just can't see it in the viewport. So how do I do it? Add. Yeah, I guess we'll leave it on multiply. So I am now doing a cubic projection, and I'm saying the cubic projection can only go where this cube is. So you'll see as I move this here, that only where it is it moving. But you'll see, like, pay attention to like right where this number is here. So we're on like 6 and 1. So as I move up, you see 6 and 1 didn't move. So we're passing through a disconnected projection. And as far as I know, that's the best we can ever do. Paul, I might check out that file off stream. But I think actually we're doing very well here. I think it's time to wrap up. We had a bunch of excellent questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for said excellent questions. We can't do the show if there aren't questions. So as long as questions keep coming, we can keep on making the show. Thank you so much, everybody. Trying to think of anything else to mention. Keep an eye out for those half-price tickets coming very, very soon. I got most of the site wrapped up yesterday. Just got a couple little technical things to flip over. But yeah, I think that will wrap this one up. Thank you so much, everybody. And until next week, bye-bye.